instead of the highly programmed kind of talk I normally do, I'm going to take a rather circuitous route through certain things I've been thinking about over the years. And in fact, I made a list of them so you can kind of look at the menu as you might if you were in a restaurant. So it was a very big move when Terry Riley appeared with a piece called In C. It was rather a shock. I'm going to talk a little bit about In C because I want to try to explain why it made such an impression on me. So I made a terrible diagram. I couldn't really come up with anything better, and this is bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, bar 4, bar 5, bar 6, bar 7, bar 8, bar 9. And this is player 1, player 2, C, D, E, F. So if it were just that, everybody would be playing in unison the whole time. But Terry had a brilliant idea, which is each player is instructed, stay on any bar for as long as you want. You have to play all the bars and you have to play them in that order, but you can stay on one for as long as you want. So what happens in this piece is it begins like that. Everybody's playing in unison. Quite quickly what happens is that players are playing different bars. So for instance, at this moment you've got 4 different bars being played, 4 there, perhaps 4 there as well. And you know, in the middle of the piece, since it's normally a piece performed with quite a lot of players, you might have 15 or 20 different bars being played together. But because it's all in C major, they will marry up in some way. I was incredibly impressed by this piece, not only in the way it sounded, but in the way it was made. It seemed to me an incredibly economical piece of music. And of course, what's fascinating about it is A, that it's never the same on any consecutive performance. It's always different. And B, Terry is not in a position to predict what it will be either. The stuff that you mostly heard in airports was played on very cheap cassette players, and it kind of went like that. And you sort of thought, if they can't even get a bloody cassette player to work, how am I going to trust my life into an airplane? So I thought, well, when people come to airports, they're nervous and there's an undertone of feeling that today I might die. I'm sure you will share that with me. So I thought, what would really be good is to have a kind of music which said to you, but does it really matter? So I want the kind of music that would make you surrender, actually, that would make you settle a little bit and not worry about being out of control for 3.5 hours, 36,000 feet above the Atlantic, which is a terrifying thought, really. So I started to work on that piece of music, and I thought, I kind of worked out how I thought it should be. And in the end, it involved, one of the pieces involved lots and lots of tape players running huge loops of tape, each loop having one sound on, and the tapes thread through chairs and tables. In fact, I've got a picture of how that worked. This is me composing the piece. So this one is going round with a Ming vase, a table, and an ordinary domestic chair. But there were about 5 or 6 of these running at the same time. I couldn't draw them all on the picture. I let the music make itself, and I sat and listened to it, just like anybody else would sit and listen to it. So this is also an interesting moment when composer becomes listener. The act of composing is actually the act of letting something happen to you. Complex things can come from simple things. Now you can probably see how that relates to this music I'm talking about. The idea that a simple system can generate a complex output is kind of news to us. We're always used to the idea that complexity can only be generated by greater complexity. So we can build a 747 because between all of us, in our minds, we've got more complexity with a 747. But the old picture, which colour shall I use? If we go to blue, I think. The old picture of how things come into being is God and man, then higher mammals perhaps, so on and so on. It's clearly a hierarchy, and it's a sort of pyramid like that, and that's the sort of big biblical idea, and then there are sort of slithery things down the bottom, and then bacteria. And we're somewhere in there. And we're in about the same place in that little sphere of life as we are in that big sphere of the universe, which is to say we aren't anywhere special. Now this sense of not being anywhere special is an idea that you can find terrifying, and a lot of people do, or you can find it liberating because it also says, so it doesn't really matter what we do, does it? It doesn't make that much difference. That concept of chain of command is absolutely built into the idea of military. You'll notice that there is nowhere on this diagram a line that goes that way. So the chain of command is downwards. Messages flow in that direction, information flows in that direction, and intelligence flows in that direction as well. These people are the smart ones, and those are the thick ones. These people will very likely get medals, and those ones will get false limbs if they're lucky. So this is a map of the Church of England. You'll see at the top the monarch, that's the Queen, Archbishop of Canterbury, then he appears there as well, with the Archbishop. Those are the two major Archbishops of England. Then there are lots of bishops, lots of deans, thousands of vicars and rectors, and then the ladies who arrange the flowers in the church, who, as everyone knows, are the really important people in the church. Here's the centre of the pyramid, and unwritten, of course, is composer, who sits above the conductor, and then God, who sits above the Again, if you look at classical records from the 1940s and 50s, the texts on them are very, very funny because they always sort of like to give you the impression that the composer got it directly from God. That God was humming a tune and Beethoven over which I think is a bit demeaning to Beethoven, really. Anyway, the same situation again. The flow of information goes God, composer, conductor, first violinist, section principals, section sub-principals, rank and file, basically. They call them rank and file, just like you do in the army. And again, it isn't particularly welcomed if the trombone player decides to do something different one day because he's had a good idea. So I feel that what we're doing is we're gradually moving towards a relationship with each other that is closer to that than to that. Although, of course, we still inherit these pictures of the world, these pyramidal pictures. We still tend to think that the president is very important and that the janitor isn't. And, of course, the way things are set up at the moment is generally true. It might not always be so. It's an English idea, really. You know, the idea that you had God, then Englishmen, then horses, dogs, women, the French. The way it works is that I have 3 computers running, and each one addresses 4 plasma screens. And on those screens are constantly changing images. Boy, that sounds so boring. I wouldn't get on the basis of that. The way those images are generated, they're pictures that I made. Each computer has 4 banks of those pictures, and it is randomly selecting from those banks. One from bank A, one from bank B, one from bank C, and fading up and fading out those images. So an image is made up of layers. So I've taken 4 particularly ugly layers here. There's one layer. That could be another one. This could be a third one. This is a terrible way of selling the show, I'd say. Here's a 4th. Oh, we got 5 here. This is a 5-layer job. Let's fit. So when combined, they create this, which doesn't look much better than the rest. It's called 77 million paintings because when we first did it, there were 77 million possible combinations of images. But actually, it's now rocketed up geometrically, and I think that there are about 100 million cubed versions available now. Started slightly disastrously because the whole of the city of Sydney, the governors and the mayor and everyone turned up for the opening that night. We were all standing sort of in this position on the other side of the harbour looking at the Sydney Opera House, and there was a countdown to the opening of the piece after long speeches about my brilliance by various dignitaries. And 7:30 it started, and it looked like a huge pizza. Even worse, it looked like after you've eaten the pizza, it looked like vomit, actually. That's the problem with these random systems, you just don't know what they're going to do. Their boats, if they're very rigid, they're not going to last. This is why it was so difficult to make the transition from wooden boats to metal ones. In a large wooden boat, in a sort of ship of the line in the British Navy, there would be 20 or so men permanently employed, scooping out water and filling cracks because the woodwork of the boat is always moving like this. But that made for a boat that could navigate difficult waters. It had some surrender in it. In human terms, if you think of an activity that is really perfectly poised between surrender and control, it's surfing. When you surf, which I don't do, by the way, but I'm reliably informed by much healthier people than myself, that what you do is you're constantly either riding the wave, which means you're surrendering to it, or you're trying to control it. You're trying not to be thrown off. I remember when I lived in San Francisco in 1978, I used to go to gospel churches occasionally because I love gospel music. And it was always easy to identify the best churches because it's where the best dressed girls were going. You'd find inevitably, if you followed the good-looking girls, they would end up at the really good churches. And I remember that feeling of being completely taken over by this music and thinking, am I really an atheist? I don't know. I really started wondering, what is it that is tapping into me there? I eventually realized, at least to my satisfaction, it was this need to surrender. But I think all of those are ways really of saying to human beings, there is a place where you're allowed to surrender, where you're allowed to stop taking the control pose, where you're allowed to be part of things. Now, why is this important? If you can't control things and you try, you're likely to get knocked over. If you can't control things and you're rigid and you can't go with the flow, as they probably say in Asheville quite a lot. If you can't do that, then you'll get knocked over by the flow. So surrendering is an important part of our mental equipment, and it's something that we always have to remind ourselves that we're capable of doing. And not only capable of doing, but capable of loving and enjoying. So my feeling about what this kind of art does, but lots of kinds of art do, is to offer you the chance to once again experience that feeling, the feeling of surrender. Tool makers like Moog, people who come up with these new technologies, are really as important a part of the ecology of culture as any of the rest of us. Because artists don't go up to technologists and say, can you design me a synthesizer with 3 oscillators that are calibrated in this way and blah, blah, blah. They don't. Technologists make tools and artists find ways of using them. And very often they find whole new forms of music as a result of doing it. This notion of culture, not as a top-down with the artist at the top. Of course, you get paid well being the artist at the top, and unfortunately, that has to be a picture that will change. So we will make less money in the future, because we're going to realize that all the other people involved in the ecology of culture are also very important. At the bottom of everything that we talk about when we talk about art is the unanswered, dirty question. What is art for? Why do we like it? My friend Danny Hillis is a scientist, and Danny's question was, why do we like music? And that is such a profoundly difficult question to answer that I don't know if I can really start answering at 3:17, but I shall have a go. First of all, it's interesting to me that it doesn't bother critics that question is unanswered. The fundamental question of why do we want to engage with art at all? Just to say, well, because we like it, doesn't really answer the question. Because then you say, well, why do we like it? Why do we have preferences? Why do I prefer blues to reds? Why do I prefer Dave Brubeck to Mozart, for example? Or why do I prefer nearly anyone to Mozart, actually? Why do we make choices? For instance, why do I prefer things that to a Martian would be indistinguishable, like the late Haydn string quartets to the middle Beethoven string quartets? A Martian wouldn't tell the difference, they sound very similar. What is the root of preferences? And what are we doing when we engage with an artwork? Culture is everything you don't have to do. So, all the things that we call culture are all the optional parts of our lives. You have to wear clothes, but they don't have to be Paul Smith or Levi or Chanel. We could all just sort of wear sacks if it was just about keeping warm, or animals. You have to eat, but you don't have to develop these incredibly beautiful exotic cuisines like Indian food with gold leaf over it, or stuffed jalapeno peppers with coconut shrimps, or whatever you do. You have to move around, actually, but you don't have to dance. So a lot of the things that humans do, in fact, most of the things that humans who aren't in a disastrously difficult situation do, are stylistic choices. So we're constantly navigating our way through stylistic worlds. And what's the point of doing that? Why do we do that? Why are we so interested in it? Why are we all caught up in it? What we ought to be doing is thinking, how can people accommodate change at the rate at which it's now happening? And there's every sign that that rate will accelerate. You know, it's not slowing down. There's every sign that it will become pretty chaotic at times as well. But how do people ever learn to deal with all this new stuff? Well, I think they learn to deal with it by learning to experience and enjoy new kinds of feelings, different kinds of feelings, feelings they never had before, combinations of feelings they never had before. And to me, this is what we want from art. This is why we have an appetite for it. This is why you're all here. Not to listen to me, but to listen to everything else. You're here because you enjoy rehearsing that ability that you have to encompass things, to enjoy things. A very wealthy rancher from Texas decides to trace his roots, which are actually from the south of England. His family has been in Texas for several years, several generations in fact. So he goes back to Devon, and he's driving around in his chauffeur-driven car, and he sees an old yokel leaning against a fence like that. And he says to the guy, "Is this your farm?" And the guy says, "Yeah." And go from all the way up the top of the hill down to the stream there. "That's all mine." And the rancher says, "You know, I can get up in the morning, drive all day, and I still don't reach the other side of my farm." And the old guy says, "Yeah, I used to have a car like that." I was inexperienced as a producer then. They were very experienced in knowing what they wanted from their music. And I had this terribly difficult, for me, situation of them pulling out. They had this huge chest like this, that big, that they'd shipped over from America, of all of their demo tapes. And they would pull a demo tape out and they'd say, "You hear that snare drum sound?" It had been recorded in a garage with a cheap cassette mic 14 years earlier, and the tape had been left in a pool of oil or something. That was the sound they wanted. I'm never very good at making something happen again anyway. I just never try. If something's happened once, I think that was great, now we'll do something new. I'm no good at recreating things. And so it was a little bit difficult. But I'm proud of that record, and I think America should be very proud of Devo, actually. Yeah.